Oh, welcome back to Arguing Agile. It's the podcast where I, product manager Brian Orlando, and enterprise agility coach Mr. Om Patel.
We get together and argue all things Agile so you don't have to.
That's right. You ain't got it. Well, I mean, you can still do it.
You can still do it.
We're not taking that away from you.
That's true. Not this week.
If that's what you enjoy. We've been doing a lot of product topics recently, and I wanted to have a team-specific topic to break up the monotony. To be fair, I wanted to have a team-specific topic, and I found this Peter Drucker book. Don't be scared of the title, Post-Capitalist Society by Peter Drucker, because it's not really about overthrowing the hierarchy and instituting a new... Anarchist? Instituting an anarchist society. Yeah, that sounds fun. It sounds like a fun thing to do on the weekend, but that's not what this is about. I did read this once to you, but very quickly. That's the elevator pitch for this podcast, because I'm very bad at elevator pitches. My elevator pitches are 90 seconds long, as you see here. But I want to read you this and get your reaction as our expert on teams.
Let's do it.
What he's saying is the knowledge workers in the future of society, the business won't really know what the knowledge workers do. And the knowledge workers are the experts at the work. So you need a different way to manage. And he says that although they did have teams in the capitalist society, in the society of Taylorism, right? There were different teams, and he gives some examples to illustrate. So I'm going to walk through those examples now. Okay, so here we go. On page 86, he talks about 3 different types of teams. There's a second major difference between the productivity of making and moving things and the productivity of knowledge work and service work. That's where I was leading in, right? In knowledge and service work, we have to decide how the work should be organized. What kind of human team is appropriate? I like human team. 1983. We weren't considered humans in 1983. I don't know if you know that.
That's true.
What kind of human team is appropriate for this kind of work and its flow? Most human work is carried out in teams. Hermits are exceedingly rare. Even the most solitary artists, writers, or painters depend on others for their work to become effective. The writer on an editor, the printer a bookstore, the painter on a gallery to sell his or her work, and so on. Most of us work in far closer relationship to our teammates. There's a great deal of talk today about, quote, creating teamwork. This is largely a misunderstanding. It assumes that the existing organization is not a team organization, and that is demonstrably false. It secondly assumes that there is only one kind of team, but in effect, there are 3 major kinds of teams for all human work. And for work to be productive, it has to be organized into a team that is appropriate for the work itself and its flow. Let me stop there for a second.
Wow, he's covered a lot of ground right there.
Yeah,
way back in the day.
Yeah,
right.
While you're processing, while you're spinning, I see your CPU spinning up.
It definitely is overheating.
Yeah,
right
the
now.
cycles are spinning up. I'd like to take a second to step back and talk about why I pulled this one off the bookshelf.
That's better.
To talk about it. Yeah, thank you. It's amazing that this book was written in the early 90s, 1994. It's funny to me that he's pointing these things out and he's kind of outlining these things that kind of make us say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. It's something that a lot of people don't think about or whatever. Because where he was and the research he did, it's like the business world just kind of saw it and read it and was like, that's interesting. That's a really interesting concept. And then they ignored it and said, but we know we can figure out how to do things better. We don't need this.
It really makes you wonder why nothing's moved since that time, until recently. This hasn't really been talked about much, right? Until now, I guess. Or even now. Now there's different models out there for teamwork and teaming and team structures, etc. But yeah, he was definitely ahead at that time.
Well, there's different models out there, but kind of my challenge very quickly is the model of I'm the manager and you do what I say is still, in my experience in product development, the do what I say manager is pretty much, I would say, the majority of the team structure. Is you have a team, it's hierarchical, you work for somebody, there's a lead, they have team members under them, and that org structure is basically the prevailing org structure, and that org structure basically traces its roots all the way back to Taylorism, and quite honestly doesn't really do much for the knowledge worker in the modern, software development team.
Yeah, I absolutely concur with that. I think what's happened is between then and now, if anything, we've seen the ascent of matrixed organizations.
Right.
And that's just made matters worse when it comes to hierarchy. Now you have a hierarchy of hierarchies and people aren't really neatly into a given hierarchy because you beg, steal, and borrow, quote unquote, resources.
Right.
I think to your point, are the models today any good? We have a lot of them, right? So today, I guess the devil in me wants to say, try one. But if you really examine those and you look at that against the backdrop of the type of work that people are doing today, I think there's a misfit there. This idea of a hierarchical manager, because they're not a leader, basically saying, do this by this date, do it the way I say you should do it. That's still, to your point, it's very prevalent today. And I think we're suffering as a result of that, especially in knowledge work, right? Not just software development, but pretty much any type of knowledge work.
Let's step back for a second and talk about a podcast series that we would like to do, but like are kind of afraid to because everyone like moans and groans when you bring up the topic of an agile transformation. But I feel the agile community specifically have been undermined by what we're talking about here. It's the organization and the people running the organization do not fully grasp or understand teams and team concepts. The concept of teams and what teams are for and how the different types of teams. They don't grasp this, and they don't understand what it takes to make a good team. But the thing they know is what they were taught in their MBA. There's an org hierarchy, and you got to move resources from one resource manager to another, and that's the way they view it.
Yeah, and the other thing that has been pushed at them.
I would say HR is not helping with this either. But
no, they're the drivers in many cases. But the other thing is this overwhelming emphasis on keeping people busy. Utilization. Right. People must be utilized. Otherwise, if they're underutilized, we're losing money. Unfortunately, that again is way too prevalent out there. Well,
that's, I actually I had a discussion today about this exact subject. We were talking about the book 4,000 Weeks. So many people were kind of shocked after they read the book. A new world has opened up because I've been taught and I've been trained and I've been conditioned. That's what I'm looking for. I've been conditioned to feel like I have to pack every single day with as much being as productive as possible. And the book basically is like, well, but why? And I as a product manager, I'm like, well, yeah, of course. Like that's just the way that I think. Like, this is something I say a lot in product management, is like prioritization. The outcome of prioritization is in no way, shape, or form a signal for value. Just because you've decided this is your number one priority, you've got to get this done. And it also has absolutely no value. That's why, like online, like on LinkedIn, you see people, especially the growth product manager people, they're making a real killing off of slamming on Agile, because they're like, you can have the greatest Agile team following the greatest Agile processes, and the product you put out at the end, nobody wants to use, and it's all garbage. Which I like. They're doing that to start a fight on LinkedIn and get engagement and stuff like that. But because we all know, like, if you actually are getting customer feedback and you're actually listening to them, not just saying, yep, the customer was at the meeting, check the box. You're basically doing what they are claiming is a completely different discipline with a completely different skill set. I don't know, but this is not the podcast of that.
That might be an upcoming podcast.
I think it might be.
Yeah.
I think they'd have something to say about that. They like hot takes.
Yeah, I think what we've seen since 1994, was it? Different models evolve, and honestly, my experience has been none of the models really hit it out of the park. Most of them have their pros and cons, like any model, really. But the important thing is nobody really implements any of these by the book. So they dabble, and then they say, this doesn't work here, so we're going to change it up. Now you've already gone away from the model. Right. And then what you have is a hybridized version of that model.
Are there actual team models out there? Like, I don't think I've ever seen this is the way you should structure your teams, other than the early Scrum guys that, like, when we tried last podcast to say, like, where's the thing that says your team member should be dedicated to the Scrum team, and we couldn't find it because it had been rolled out of the Scrum guide. But are there team models other than team topologies, which we covered on another podcast? I see the team topologies guys out there on the internet, Manuel Pius and
Skelton.
Matthew Skelton. I see them out there trying to help people, trying to say, hey, this is a better way, catch on to it. And then I see like the Spotify, the people trying to copy Spotify and stuff like that. And it always fails because they try to copy Spotify until an actual decision needs to be made, and then they revert back to command and control. But so I guess there are a few models that are floating out there.
Well, Scrum itself is a model, right?
Yeah,
I mean, 5 to 7 people, etc. That's a model. And then there are other models which are different than that, right? Like holacracies. These are more organizational models, but you could extend the argument that they could be applied at a team level. Yeah. But again, not really seen that done well anywhere.
Yeah. Kanban, I guess, could be implemented as a team level, like a concentric teams that work with other teams that work with other teams. And in fact, you could run a whole organization off Kanban if you wanted a process to layer down, to give your business a bit of process to help with prioritization, to help with breaking stuff down, large rocks into small rocks or whatever. Kanban kind of helps you all the way from the executive level all the way down to all levels of the organization, and can quote scale, I guess.
But that's a great example of another model that hasn't been really implemented very well. Because Kanban is easy to explain, but it requires some discipline to actually practice. Yeah. And you've seen all kinds of malpractices out there.
Also, is this the time to bring up nobody's making money off of Kanban? Is this time for that? I don't think this is the podcast.
No, this is not the podcast for that.
Just checking. There are a few people who are doing Kanban certification. Why the Kanban certification is so expensive?
I'd like to know that too.
They're ridiculously expensive.
Somebody's making a ton of money out of these things.
Oh man. Let me dig into the first example. So he says, the first kind of team is exemplified by the baseball or cricket team. It is also the kind of team that operates on a patient in a hospital. In this team, all players play on the team, but they do not play as a team. So he says each player on a baseball or cricket team has a fixed position which he never leaves. In baseball, the outfielders never assist each other. They will stay in their respective positions. If you are up at bat, you are totally alone, is an old baseball saying. Similarly, the anesthesiologist will not come to the aid of the surgical nurse or the surgeon. He says this team does not enjoy good press today. In fact, when people talk about building teams, quote, building teams, they usually mean that they want to move away from this kind of team. Yet the baseball or cricket team has great strengths that should not be discounted. Because all players occupy fixed positions, they can be given specific tasks of their own, can be measured by performance, scores for each task, can be trained for each task. It is by no means accidental that both baseball and cricket that there are stats for every player going back for decades. The surgical team in the hospital functions much in the same way.
He's got a point there, right? So this is, again, look, the time where he wrote this, it was basically the time of the I-shaped individuals, right? Everybody was an expert in what they did.
Right.
And he's got a couple of great examples there, sports as well as the hospital setting that he portrays there. You had a skill set that you acquired over time. You paid handsomely for it, probably. Right. But then you practice that, right? So without you as an integral cog in the machine, it doesn't work. That was the prevalent model at the time, and I dare say it still is prevalent, but it's getting changed, I should say, in quite a few areas. Sports is another example.
Let's apply this to software development, but apply it in a way where it's lacking in sophistication, where you say, well, I've hired a developer, they should be able to develop anything. Well, which is kind of, if you look at it that way, I could argue for that, like, hello, we're arguing Agile. I could argue for this from that perspective. I know I would be wrong, so I'm not even going to try, because it's ridiculous to say, like, well, just hire me any developer. Like, like you're going to hire a Java developer to work in a .NET shop, or you're going to work a front end developer to work on back end stuff. Or I've been in shops where we take a front end developer and ask them to do back end tasks. Because we had a lot of back-end tasks, and also because because development leadership slowly over time is trying to grow full stack engineers out of their front and back end talent. They're trying to help people develop their skills. I feel the people that would engage in this kind of viewpoint of saying, like, well, I have a developer. What does it matter if their expertise is first base or, left field or whatever, like, or right field or like the outfield?
Yeah,
that's a big difference in position, though.
Of course there is, right? So that's like saying, look, you've got a person who can paint a house. Commission them to make a portrait of you.
Right, yeah. Paint the Mona Lisa.
Yeah, paint the Mona Lisa. That's right. They're a painter. They can do it. Shove them up on a rig and say, do the Sistine Chapel. Come on, you can do it. But I do have to say the other side of that, which is since then and now, what we're seeing is, just to use his example of sports, in other sports where people can actually fill in to another position. And that's not just accidental. That is deliberate. They evolve to fill in, like in soccer, like even in ice hockey. You have people that will rush forward, and then you have others that will fall back to fill the void. Mm-hmm. And if you just did that because of that specific occurrence, that wouldn't work, because it's just a warm body in the right spot, but they don't have the skills. Right. So people have to train for that. And I think that's happening
Yeah.
to a certain degree, probably a lot lesser degree, I would say. It's happening in software development too. So you have people that can write a script. You have you have testers that can develop. They're technical. They write test cases, test scenarios all the time. That's coding basically. So if they sit alongside a developer, they're acquiring these skills. They're growing those skills to the point where can they become a developer? Only if they wanted to over time, but they can pinch hit for somebody.
Right.
And that's the T-shape that we're talking about often
Right.
on this podcast.
Right. The people managing the team he's talking about here, everybody has a specific spot. I think of all of the engineering leaders that I've been coupled with in my career who really were like, you could not shake their opinion that the best way to run an engineering team was to have front-end developers and back-end developers and keep them dedicated to just front-end work and just back-end work, that the teams had no full-stack developers, real tight specializations, and crossing work between developers outside of their specialization was not.
It was taboo.
Yeah. It was not encouraged.
That's the general specialist at best, right? So you're a specialist, and if you say, well, look, so-and-so's not here today, can I lend a hand? It's not your role.
Yeah, right. That's not your job.
That's not your job, yeah. Yeah, I think the shift to that from the other's perspective is to be a special generalist, I guess, but somebody who does really well at their core skill set, right?
Yeah.
But they can also lend a hand.
Yeah.
That's different from give that person the same responsibilities, the same accountabilities as the other person who's an expert in their own field. I've seen architects do this quite a bit. And then they become what is now, I guess, referred to as the M shape now, right? Where the M for multiple. So they become specialists in multiple technologies. You're a cloud technology expert in AWS. And then you become a cloud technology expert in something else, Google or Azure.
That was the core idea of DevOps is if you build it, you own it, and you're going to need to understand more than just your tiny little slice of a language that you primarily develop in order to operate like that. I don't even know if this is prevalent anymore, but I like in my career, even as recently as a couple of years ago, I've encountered this where they just don't want developers venturing outside of the role that they hired them in for. I encountered it all the time in contracting, and I would push back on it with basically I would see it in the tech side of the firm, and I would push back on it with the business side of the firm to say, this is going to limit you guys. You understand that, right? Like basically the product owners are going to have to bring in every sprint. The product owners are going to have to bring in a balance of front end and back end work. And the product, you're basically putting on the product owner to say, what's the most value you can bring into the business, and what's the most value that you can bring in the business that we can work on right now, because I don't have the skill to work on everything at once. I don't know why this is still so prevalent, because it just seems backwards to me. We all understand at some point you're going to call in the cavalry at some point. When you want to go have a sleek product and design, you're going to go and you're going to call in an experienced front-end engineer, a UI UX person, someone to streamline your user experience through the whole app and give your app that sleek polish that you don't care about when you're trying to rush things out.
That's right. Those good UI UX people are like gold dust.
They
You just can't
absolutely
find them.
Not-
I've
not-
been struggling to find good people like that.
Not like
I get
WWE
a pile of
companies.
resumes that say UI UX on them, and that's how they get through the ATS screen. But when you talk to them, they're like, "Well, I use this tool." So, all right,
I don't know.
I'm out.
I think the best UI. I have a really great UI UX person who lives here in Tampa. I would like to try to get him on the podcast to talk specifically about UI UX. But again, like it's its own discipline. It's UI UX. Even though I say it, I'm being flippant when I say it. But UI UX is different than just a front end engineer.
Of course.
Right, and that's kind of what we're going with what we're like this subject of like, well, I'll just have a team and I'll have a front end engineer and I'll just tell them add a checkbox, add a drop down. Well, that's different from hiring a UI UX person. It's actually the opposite. You're hiring the UI UX person to tell you what you should do to have a great user design experience, as opposed to I'm hiring this front end engineer so I can tell them what I want to do.
The UI UX person will be able to tell you, they've already spent 15 clicks to get to this point. Do you really want them to do another 3? Right. So they focus on the journey, the customer journey, right? And that's a different mindset. The front-end developers really don't have that necessarily. At least that's been my experience.
To cap this category, he says, for repetitive tasks and for work in which the rules are well known, the baseball team is ideal. So yeah, here we go. Front end, back end. Like, I feel this is every senior developer, director, developer that tried to jam that square peg into that round hole because they were trying to, like, oh, this is something familiar. A front end, back end developer, I can pay this and it's familiar. And it was this model on which modern mass production, the work of making and moving things, was organized, and to which it owes a great deal of performance capacity.
So the rules are known, very little risk, and you're basically stamping out widgets is what he's saying,
right. Yeah,
right?
There's very little to no risk. I guess maybe something breaks or whatever, but there's very little to no risk because everyone's working on their place on the assembly line. Everyone's doing the exact same job over and over and over again, and there's almost no risk in that.
You can sub people around if you want. If somebody doesn't show up, that's fine. That's not a rare skill set.
It's really
call
not.
Someone in.
And honestly, if you roll it back to our podcast on Taylorism, which I will link
in the comments below.
Yeah. If you roll it back to our podcast on Taylorism, like the era where this was happening, there, like public education was not even a thing. Like most of these factory workers didn't even I remember early in our podcast. I think I left it in the editing. I don't know. It's been a long time since I watched our podcast on Taylorism. Like most of the workers didn't even they had to like buying a permanent pair of shoes was a big consideration because a lot of them didn't even have shoes.
For sure, I believe that. You're talking what 1920s?
Before that.
Even before, yeah.
Yes,
I believe that.
Yeah, it was before that.
Yeah.
That's the era where these ways were invented. These ways to run teams were invented.
And they still around.
Most people had to walk to work, and they had to decide whether they wanted to buy a really, really, really expensive pair of shoes that would last them a couple of years, or a cheap pair of shoes that would last them, just a couple months, or not have shoes at all.
So the nature of work has changed. That's what's changed, right? And the team structures are still predominantly the same.
Yes.
That's the problem we have. It wasn't knowledge work back in the day. Now it's all knowledge work. Pretty much all knowledge work.
So his second type of team, he says, the second type of team is the soccer team. It is also the team concept on which the symphony orchestra is organized and the model for the hospital team that rallies around the patient who goes into cardiac arrest at 2 a.m. Here we go into a quote. On this team, 2, all players have fixed positions. The tuba player in the orchestra will not take over the parts of the double bass. They stick to their tubas. In the crisis team at the hospital, the respiratory technician will not make an incision in the chest of the patient to massage the heart. But on these teams, the members work as a team. Each coordinates his or her part with the rest of the team. And then he says, this team requires a conductor or coach, and the word of the conductor or coach is law. It also requires a score, quote score, and it requires endless rehearsals to work well. But unlike the baseball team, it has great flexibility if the score is clear and if the team is well led, and it can move very fast.
To think that he said that back in 1995, and even 4, okay. Yeah. But even today, right, we don't have that model in very many places when you think about it. You have care teams, as they're called, right? So he mentioned healthcare. Yeah, well, that's true. You do have healthcare teams. They work in a team environment.
Yeah.
But, that's pretty much it, really. I mean, you think about software development, you don't necessarily have that. Some forward-looking, forward-thinking organizations do mob programming, for instance, kind of an offshoot from pair programming. So when it was 2, we called it pair. We added a third one. It's not a pair anymore. And then we started having people look over their shoulder, hence mob programming. And that is still pretty rare overall. And why is that? Right? It's because the bean counters can't fathom how is it that 6 people are working on this one thing?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we have one person working on it? And that's the reason why. What they don't realize is there's better quality built in because 6 pairs of eyes are contributing to the solution here. One person knocks it out and then, it's failed. It comes back again. And
that's interesting because where I was going with this was I think this is the modern software development feature team. I think this is the majority of what we deal with. The soccer team, where everyone looks the same on paper, and theoretically they should get along. If we take a soccer team into consideration for a second, everybody knows there are players on the team that are more skilled than other people on the team.
That's true of a software development team also. Right. You have your prima donnas, right?
But if he's going to say the second team is a soccer team where like they need a coach, they need someone keeping them pointed in the right direction. There needs to be constant effort on the part of the coach to keep them pointed in the right direction, to keep them where is it? It requires a score, basically. I'm going to break his example here in a second. Actually, I'm going to break his example right now. You have two coaches. You have one coach who is the process coach, and you have one coach who is the business coach. So basically, you have a product owner, and you have a team coach, team lead, process person, whatever. The way the work gets done and the work to be done, what you're working on and how you do it.
Right.
And then where it breaks down is where he says they're okay as long as they have a coach. I think as long as they have a coach part of it is where we're going to break this down and say, well, most teams have really terrible leaders who don't know what they're doing and don't paint a clear direction and don't get, and don't get anything special from the team. I don't know a lot about soccer, but I would imagine there are teams that are better than other teams and generally players that work together that are better than other players that work together. And the domineering, quote, coach that's trying to tell you all the things to do and trying to be involved in every single play and every single, come on. That's not going to work for a team like this.
That's too prescriptive. That dictatorial approach almost, right? That requires the team to simply park their brains at home, show up, and do as they're told. And that team's not going to win.
Right. Well, here we go.
Big picture.
Here we go. Here comes a clip of what I wanted to say in this podcast. So because the management style of the organization is the first type of team.
Right.
And the team style is the second type of team, and now we're in one organization trying to gain success. You're not even you're on different planets at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. The two are chalk and cheese, and you're trying to mix them, and that's a recipe for disaster.
The team requires a conductor or a coach. The word of the conductor or coach is law. It requires a score and endless rehearsals. Like in our line of work, I see this as like a cycle of retrospectives that are just on a schedule and constant introspection of what we could be doing better and stuff like that.
This is classic inspect and adapt, right? This is what it is. You do
right.
something, you look back and see how you did, you improve, use some more, rinse and repeat.
Yeah. I kind of want to move on to the next point, but I kind of want to stop here and talk about why management is so out of sync. And maybe what we can do to get management back in sync, because the team structure and team organization and really org design, that's kind of where we're going with this.
We're going to do a big podcast on that. At one point.
Your management has to be aligned with good organizational design to support good software. Because if you have bad organizational design, you're going to get bad software. That's Conway's law, basically, in a box.
Absolutely. I concur, but to your point about why management is not on board with this, think about who they are and how they got to where they are. They didn't get to where they are by doing it that way. They got to where they are by being directive, telling people what to do, when to get it done by. And that's the reason why they can't think this way.
I don't know
for the most part.
Yeah. Like if I'm looking for places to push back, that'll be the first place I push back is did they get there like that? I think of all the directive managers I've ever worked for, they had a whole staff of good-natured people that kind of took their beating and and took it in stride and had a positive attitude, and up until the day where they just couldn't take it anymore and then they quit
or they
went
fired
somewhere else. And those managers taking credit for their work all along the way. People like you just described, that's what I've seen them make their careers on. They make their careers on the back of people that
they do. They do, but they didn't make their careers nurturing teams.
Oh no,
right?
No.
And creating a good organizational design. That's not how they made their careers. They made their careers by stepping over people. Right? And those people that they step over are basically, collateral damage. Right. It is what it is. Right. They get tired and leave, or they're fired, or riffed off, or whatever, right? That's how they got to where they are. So we can't expect those people to come up with decent organizational design. It's not in their DNA.
Well, I mean, at the point where you're going there, at the point where you're super low on empathy, you're not looking out for what's best for people, and you're not trying to put people over the top, and you're trying you're trying to claim credit for what other people did. And you're not really trying to promote other people. I don't know. If you're in that situation, we have other podcasts for this. Let me move on to the last point, or his last team while I'm here. Finally, there's the doubles tennis team. the team also of the jazz combo, or of the 4 or 5 senior executives who together constitute the, quote, president's office. And in the large American company, or the Vorstand. Sorry, board of management. Vorstand.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry. Had to be German there for our listeners in Germany. You can hear me screw up. Vorstand. This team has to be small, 7 to 9 people, may be the maximum. The players have a, quote, preferred rather than a, quote, fixed position. They, quote, I don't know why there's so many quotes in here. The passage stands alone by itself without quotes. Anyway, the team has to be small, 7 to 9 people, may be the maximum. The players have a preferred rather than a fixed position. They cover for one another, and they adjust themselves to the strengths and weaknesses of each other. The player in the back of the court in doubles tennis adjusts to the strengths and the weaknesses of the partner who plays the net. And the team only functions when this adjustment to the strengths and weaknesses of the partners has become a conditioned reflex. That is, when the player in the back of the court starts running to, quote, cover for the weak backhand of the partner at the net the moment the ball leaves the racket of the player on the other side. A well-calibrated team of this kind is the strongest team of all. Its total performance is greater than the sum of the individual performances of its members, for this team uses the strength of each member while minimizing the weaknesses of each. But this team requires enormous self-discipline. The members have to work together for a long time before they actually function as a, quote, team. And here we come to the main lane of, I feel like, what every organization wants to have, but fails to properly envision, understand, engage a team coach to get to. Like, they don't understand that this is the goal. They don't understand how to get to this goal. But I think every organization understands that this is the goal.
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. I mean, a lot of times people hear about the terms self-organizing teams,
right,
self-managing teams.
Yeah.
And those people that understand those terms, they'll be like, okay, tell us how we can get there, because they may not have the answers. But those that don't understand it, they misinterpret it and say, no, we need to control these teams. Otherwise, it's going to be chaos. So we're self-managing. They don't know what they're doing. We need to tell them. And so they go back in that command and control mode.
I'm glad you jumped first to the word control, because it's the word that most fits in this position. I was in an organization once in a scale capacity, big team, 6, 7 teams, right? And I recall hearing over and over again, how do we know that everyone's, punching out cogs on the assembly line? How do we know that everyone's working, how do we know that people aren't taking advantage of us and working, 39 hours instead of 40 hours or whatever? Right. I'm like, is that really the concern here? Is that really what you're worried about?
It goes back to that utilization, right? You covet that. Keep people busy. Well, if they're busy, I know they're working. Forget what they're producing, though.
Well,
right?
Each of these team models I read today, management is structured to support one of these team models. I don't think management can be, maybe I'm wrong here, I'm willing to be challenged here. Maybe management can be structured to support multiple of these.
So I'll lean in a little bit on that one. I don't think you'll get to a situation which is, wherever you are, you can suddenly go from there and transition to this ideal world of having self-organizing teams. There's a journey between those two states, and you potentially could have teams that flex in that way, right? So in those scenarios, you would have management possibly embracing multiple models for a period of time. They have to have the appetite. They have to have the trust in the teams.
Yeah.
And lastly, I think you mentioned this, they need to engage the counsel of somebody who can help them with it, right? Yeah. In the capacity of a coach.
Right.
Get help.
Get help, yeah. Get Help is a great, I was going to say it's a great movie title. Get Help. Get Help it's a great message. Like, it's a great message to end with, Get Help, because this would probably be a good post for LinkedIn, and not the normal LinkedIn posts of people trying to get attention on the internet, right? By throwing out their hot takes over the internet. But this probably would be a good post for LinkedIn. In this book, again, here we go, one more time before we're done for today. Peter Drucker, Post-Capitalist Society. Again, don't be scared about the title. He's not talking about the revolution. I mean, unless you're down for a revolution, then sign me up. I'm going to speak singularly because I don't know if you back me on this one. But what I'm saying here is that there are management styles that support these types of teams. And if you're managing to the first type of team we talked about, But you want the third type of team working in your organization, pushing you forward. You're never going to get that.
Right.
You need to adjust. And you, as the leader in the organization, here I go. I just switched from management to leadership. You, as the leader in the organization, you need to make the first move, because your teams are not going to evolve with your dated management style. Going back to the first, like you, everyone needs to be in their own positions. I can't have a front end developer go learning back end stuff or go figuring out how to optimize database store procedures. My front end developer. Why are you doing that? Why are you working on that? Don't do that.
Talk to the DBA.
You should let the DBA do that. He's better at it than you. You'll never be good at anything. Like what a terrible message. If you're having problems with this at a team level, you should bring it up with like whoever the leader of your business unit is, whoever that is, whoever can make a difference.
You should definitely start with yourself, though. Look in the mirror and say, am I enabling this organization to be self-managing, right? And if I'm doing that, what are the obstacles? My peers on the board, okay, talk to them.
Yeah.
Right? Give people, the teams, enough rope to work with, trust them to get the job done, and leave them alone for a bit. And you'll be amazed what they come up with.
I feel in the first example, the baseball team where everyone plays their individual positions and everyone gets scored on their individual positions, I don't feel trust is strong in that model.
It isn't because you're trying to do the best for yourself, not for your team.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, uncool. I think that's thoroughly uncool.
Absolutely agree, because then how many people on a baseball team?
38,000.
I know. Let's say 20. I don't really know. But do you really want a single baseball team with 11 people on it, or do you want 11 teams of one person each? That's the decision you have to make. Because if everybody's in it for themselves, then you don't have a team. You have individual teams.
I'm wrapping up. What I learned today is 26 people are on a baseball team. That's what I learned today.
I'll tell you what I learned is Mr. Drucker was very talented, way ahead of his time.
I can't believe it, yeah.
So if you haven't read his stuff, definitely you should.